facilitators for this town hall. Both Mac and I are youth ambassadors. Along with 12 other ambassadors, we've been leading the development of the city's first youth strategic plan. As this process unfolds, we get to live through unprecedented times. Yet we have an opportunity to rethink how we care for one another and support the development of youth in our city. Today's town hall conversation is focused on the sustainability of social reform, an opportunity to envision youth development differently in our city. This town hall builds from our last town hall where youth made recommendations to improve public safety, provide educational and future planning opportunities, and increase access to social, emotional, and economic development opportunities. As a youth ambassador leading this effort, I recognize the importance of taking a stand to lead the development of my city's youth strategic plan. This is an opportunity to apply an equity lens to our work, to be part of the My Brother's Keeper movement, and find common ground to elevate the success of youth throughout Long Beach. Today's panel is comprised of community leaders who are advocating for social reform. I invite our online audience to be part of the conversation, so go ahead and submit your questions and comments online. We begin today's sessions by having our panelists answer some key questions we designed. Then we will have a Q&A session and conclude with the spoken word by Mac. So let's continue our journey of hope, power, and transformation. On our panel, we have Erick Serrato from Pacific Gateway, Jacky Guerrero from the Advancement Project, James Marks from the Professional Community Intervention Training Institute, Lian Cheun from Khmer Girls in Actions, and Dr. Sara Zaidi from UC Riverside Youth and Families Commission. Let's begin. So our first question is, why are you here today? Why is it important to invest in young people?
I guess I'll go first. I believe in that saying that the older I get, the younger my teachers are. I am so just inspired and impressed by, the younger generation who has really stepped up in the last several months. I mean, there are lots of us that have done a lot of work when we were that age, and just to see young people out in front and being just so eloquent and so forceful is just inspiring. And that's why I wanted to be on this call today, but also very plugged in to the work of MBK overall and my organization's commitment to youth development.
I can go next. Okay, sorry, my Zoom was acting up. My name is Jacky Guerrero with the Inventor Project, and yeah, I'm here today because youth development is obviously something that we see as an important and necessary investment that really does make communities safer, make communities thrive. For us, and for me personally, I just keep reflecting, and especially after this weekend of John Lewis's passing, how young, some of the early civil rights leaders were, and how they've often, young people have often led so many important civil rights movements. And I often think about that because young people are so brave and courageous. And, as I get older, I often look to them to really help guide us in terms of, where we should be looking next and where we should be pushing. So I just feel very privileged to be here today. And again, these are the spaces and the kinds of conversations we want to be having.
I'll go next. I'm here today because I just am here to kind of echo the voices of our young people and what they've been saying. For as long as there have been institutions. And they've definitely been saying it in Long Beach. And I think the Youth Strategic Plan is an example of that, and of the fact that our young people have been, if we wanted to, I think that they've always been saying what they need. And I think it's up to us to listen. So I'm here as an advocate, and I'm here, and like Jacky said, I'm extremely, and Erick, I'm extremely encouraged by the fervor and the dedication and the sense of immediacy that our young folks are expressing in terms of needing and demanding a kind of more just and equitable society. So I'm here just to echo what they've said. Thanks.
Thank you. James?
Yes, well, this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. You know, I grew up in a system that failed me, so I always felt like I needed to be that person that I didn't have to create and make sure that there was a space for the youth to have not only a voice, but a seat at the table concerning matters that impact their daily life and the future of it.
Thank you. Lian?
Hi, everyone. I'm Lian Cheun with Khmer Girls in Action. I'm here today. You know, I came to this country as a child refugee. And I remember when my family was resettled in the US, we were resettled in one of the projects in an urban neighborhood. Growing up, I grew up in a time where there was definitely a lot of disinvestment in the urban cities, and there was just a lot of challenges. And I remember growing up and remembering a lot of our arts and music programs getting cuts, and just really heavy disinvestment. And so for me, this really does feel like full circle, given that young people and centering young people's voices are just so important. I want to ditto what Jacky said in reflecting on John Lewis's life and just the role that young people have played in history in shaping social movements. And I think centering their voice and making sure that we are inclusive and thoughtful as adult allies to our young people, it'll probably be like one of the best things that we could do in terms of moving forward, especially in the post-COVID world. Thank you.
Thank you. Dawn, would you like to introduce yourself before our next question?
Hey, Dawn, you're muted. I'm not sure, sorry, Dawn, not to cut you off, but I'm not sure if anyone else is able to hear you because I can't hear you. So I'm not sure if it's the connection or not, just to let you know.
Is this better? Yeah, okay, great. So I was saying, apologies for the tardiness. I think I confused the start time with a different start time for something else. So I'm Dawn Modkins with Black Lives Matter, Long Beach, longtime resident, organizer, and happy to join you guys.
Thank you. We're glad you could make it. Our next question is, what has been your involvement in youth development reform? Does anyone want to start?
Also, just to make it easier on y'all, there is a function on Zoom where y'all can raise your hand and we can just call y'all out. So it's not everyone unmuting at once.
Thank you, Matt.
I don't mind going first, but I would love to hear from my other colleagues. I feel like they've done a lot of amazing work on this. I think just to sum it up simply, I mean, a lot of the work that we've done through the investment project to just figure out how are we going to pay for it, right? And I know we're going to get to that later, but that's been our main focus, is really supporting young people and ideating what it is that they want to fund, really supporting organizers and finding the information that they need to make their case. And then on our end, it's just like, yeah, digging through the budgets and being like, you know, how are we going to pay for this? We know there's money. And so just really looking through the information to assist you all in the work that you do.
I'll go. So youth development, one of my proudest moments was when I was in the Chicano Youth Latino Leadership Project back as a teenager. And that really kind of framed my thinking. One of the first jobs out of college was actually with the ACLU, where I worked on Williams versus State of California, looking at overcrowding and racial inequity in our state's education system. And then went on to work in nonprofits in Boyle Heights, working with low-income communities, largely teaching ESL to Latino immigrant workers and young folks that are trying to get their GED after they didn't complete. That eventually brought me to the city of Long Beach, where I'm now assistant director of Pacific Gateway, where a lot of what we do is really focused on youth development. You know, our kind of lens to that world is workforce and careers and career exploration. But we try to do it with a lot of heart. And I personally try to bring, you know, all that experience forward to make sure that we're empathizing and understanding and pushing forward.
Thank you, Erick. James, did you have something you wanted to answer the question with too?
Yes, I do. It's pretty extensive because actually my involvement in youth development actually started on the streets in the neighborhood. And it started with those who were attracted to street glamour, whether it was in the capacity of me being a big homie or a more personal role of not wanting them to repeat the mistakes that I made from going through juvenile hall, juvenile camp, California Youth Authority, so on, you know. And then it developed as once I became a coach and a mentor at Long Beach Poly High School. And then from there, I also became mentor as well as a coach and trainer. So I also got enrolled in the Professional Community Intervention Training Institute in Los Angeles under Dr. Akil Bashir. And I was referred there by Dr. Lydia Holly. So from there, we created what you call the Community Sentinels program. And that's a youth development and civic engagement course where we currently today teach the kids in Watts and different communities about the importance of civic engagement and help to develop them. And then from there, I started doing work with the Youth Justice Coalition with Kim McGill in Los Angeles. And I'm also a part of the subcommittee of the YJWG Youth Justice Work Group in Los Angeles, to where we concentrate on justice reform and restorative and transformative justice. And then here in in Long Beach, I'm also a part of the Youth Strategic Planning Committee as well. So that's how I got involved. It was just being there, wanting to stop the kids in the neighborhood from going through what I went through.
Thank you for sharing, James. I commend you for that as well. Appreciate it. Did you want to answer the question as well, Sara?
Sure. So I'm here as an educator and as an advocate of young people. I'm also a commissioner of youth and families for the city of Long Beach. My entrance into I think my critical conscience was really sparked by being at Cal State Long Beach. I did my master's there before I left for New York to do my PhD and in educational policy. And so again, I'm here as an educator of educators. I'm here as an advocate of our young people and their caretakers. I'm also on the Youth Strategic Plan Committee. So yeah, that's how I'm rooted.
Thank you for sharing. Does anybody else want to answer this question?
I could go next.
Go ahead, Lian, and then we'll go to Dawn after.
Okay. So I just want to share that My first understanding of youth development work actually, I didn't reflect back on it until I was a lot older. But when I was a teenager, I joined a youth organizing organization. And that summer, I was given an opportunity to work on a youth campaign. And that was the first time that I really learned what it meant to use my voice as a young person. Um, I was working on a campaign to prevent, at that time, the city of Oakland from implementing a youth curfew. Um, and because I grew up in East Oakland, one of the things that was really important to understand was that we knew that curfew will criminalize youth of color, and that they will send more cops to the housing projects. And that summer, I had the first, that was my first time testifying in front of city council. And I just remember that because I mentioned earlier, I grew up in the housing projects in Black and Brown communities. And my friends and I were practicing super hard to do our testimonies. And I remember that night, my voice was shaking so hard because it was the first time I was like out in public, speaking my mind and really sharing the challenges in our neighborhood and where we feel like the city could actually reinvest that money back into the community versus implementing a curfew. And so, and we won that campaign, and the city council voted down the curfew. And I literally remember it like it was yesterday because it has such a huge impact on me and on what I've chosen to do in my life. And because it was my first taste of power, of people power, of youth power, and like youth organizing really helped me channel a lot of the challenges that I had growing up. And it helped me, it was such an empowering experience. And so and that was like many years later, I was reflecting on that experience because that led to other campaigns. And because I grew up in an era of tough on crime, a lot of criminalization of poverty and just like harsh sentencing, I lost a lot of friends and family, through the process of, folks numbing themselves with drugs and alcohol and just getting caught up in, the school to prison pipeline or the trauma to prison pipeline. And just a lot of folks just dealing with really tough prison sentencing. And so, it wasn't until many years later as I was reflecting on that experience of being engaged, being able to advocate for my neighborhoods, my friends, my family, and being able to say something as a young person, that experience was also very healing as well, because it helped ground me um, in being more socially and politically conscious, and then utilizing that knowledge to build power in the neighborhoods. And so to me, that's some of the type of kind of youth development that I've kind of like entered into in my career, which is really to think about how do we support and advance both like a trauma-informed, but also a healing-centered youth development model and youth organizing model that support and center young people's voices to speak to their experience, but also to shape what their future can look like. And I see that as a very important component, not only in the past and now, but also in a post-COVID world and what we could do here in the city of Long Beach. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. We'll hear from Dawn and then we'll move on to the next question. Never mind. Okay, we'll go on to the next question until Dawn comes back. Okay. What role do adults, mentors, and youth-serving organizations could play in assisting and supporting youth and elevating their voices? Dr. Zaidi, do you want to start?
Sure. So I think that it's important that we listen first and foremost. Like I said earlier, I think that the big problem is that young people, whether it's verbally or non-verbally, they share what their needs are. They share what their grievances are. They might share it with their peers. They might share it with their families. The challenge is, are we listening? And are we listening, and then are we acting on what they're saying? So I think that our role is primarily, first and foremost, to listen. Second, to kind of find the resources that will best serve them. And then also kind of to not just talk the talk, but to walk the walk. I think young people, if we ask them, right, if we really value and center their voice and we ask them, they will let us know what they need. The challenge is are we acting on it? And I think as an educator, you know, I think that organizations do a great job of kind of making up for some of kind of what's lacking or what's being denied to them, or the resources that they don't have maybe in schools. Because I think the assumption is that schools are just always going to be safe spaces for young people. And what we can see is just from statistics and also from listening is that schools are not always the safest spaces for young people, particularly Black and Brown youth. And so I think organizations, some of them like Khmer Girls in Action in Long Beach and many others have really kind of centered their voices and helped kind of manifest what their needs are. So yeah, I think that listening is a big part of it, and then acting. So listening.
Oh, sorry, you weren't done. Can I pose a question for you, Sara? When you say about listening, do you think it goes from listening, or do you think that it should turn from listening to comprehending? Because I think that a lot of the time there is a lot of listening happening. Like they're listening, but I don't know if they're actually comprehending what the kids are saying, if that makes sense. Because kids can say the same thing, the youth can say the same thing over and over again. But then it takes the schools wanting to comprehend it. So I think that taking the question in the sense of not just listening, but also wanting to have the comprehension to listen to them and wanting to give them that space to know they're being comprehended and listened to, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think that we do. When we listen, I think oftentimes people who are serving or supposed to be serving youth, I think we understand what they're saying, but oftentimes we don't act on that. And so, yes, to speak to your point, absolutely. Should we deeply be listening and reflecting and then acting on what our young people are demanding and what they're saying they need? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that.
And Mac, was the question on mentorship? Is that, what was it specifically?
Oh, the question was, what role do adults, mentors, and youth serving
Got it.
organizations, what could they play in assisting and supporting the youth?
Cool. I mean, I guess I'll just speak. I think the thing that jumped out at me was mentorship. And I think that's something that a lot of us should really kind of galvanize around, both as organizations or as the city. Because I think it's really about kind of replenishing the aquifer of community that's just been depleted by so many forces. You know, a mentor is someone who is older than you, that's been there, that is looking back and helping lift you up. And so many of our communities have been robbed of those people, whether that's by over policing that has put so many men of color in jail, but really even the nature of work that robs our, papas y mamas from being able to come home at a decent hour to actually spend time with us. There are all these things that are pulling sort of caring adults away from youth, albeit unintentionally. And so I think mentorship is one of those things that everyone really needs to plug into. And there's a couple levels of that. There's just sort of the mentorship of being in a neighborhood that supports you. But for Pacific Gateway, it's really about that career perspective, because we really do believe that the number one kind of social determinant is an individual's social capital. If a young person doesn't know someone in that career or in that profession, or who's gotten to college and made it, it makes it all that much more difficult. And it's not just, teenagers or young people, it's young professionals who made it through college and now are unsure of how to advance in that career. And so I think one way that we can do that is sort of offer ourselves up, offer our organizations up, offer our networks up, really kind of dig deep and sacrifice and be willing to be vulnerable and give yourself to that opportunity.
Thank you. I think James touched on this earlier, talking about how we're bringing the youth, like giving them a seat at the table. And we talked about what can the adults and mentors do to elevate their voices and make sure that seat is permanent. James, if you want to speak to that.
Yes. First, I think that we have a more obligation as elders and elders. But what seems to happen is that we get caught up in these roles, titles, and positions, and we forget that these roles don't belong to us. And so it is not only our job and our duty to develop them, but it's also our job and our duty to have them, put them in a position to replace us, to create a succession plan. And what often happens is you have all these moments, but you never have the movement, because people don't want to put the children in a position. But when we talk about all of the statistics and all of the data and the problems occurring, is the kids that are being impacted by this. So what happens is you have people, they forget that the job is public service, and they get caught up in self-service and end up doing the community and the youth themselves a huge disservice.
Thank you, James. That makes total sense, and I definitely agree with that. Dawn, did you want to touch on the topic too?
Sure. I'm like, where do I dive in here? So I feel like I'm kind of entering into this space in this unique position in like multiple ways. So currently, they are trying to cut the program at UCLA, but I'm a femtor versus mentor at UCLA with the BEST program, Bruin Excellence and Student Transformation Program. And so that work is comprised of supporting student activist organizations like the BSUs, the Africana Studies, or the MECHAs, or ECLF, which is the Eagle Condor Liberation Front. So student activist organizations, and supporting them in ways that they need around the work that they're doing, providing just guidance, resources, experience and expertise to support them and their activism around issues that impact them and their futures and their communities. And so I kind of enter from that lens. I enter from a lens of being a Black mother of 3 Black men. Well, one boy who's on his way to manhood, he's 13. My oldest son just turned 25, and my bonus son is 27. And, I'm with, I'm a co-lead with our Black Lives Matter Long Beach chapter. And, as a Black woman, as a Black parent, particularly of men, the other space that I'm entering from is one of protection in every way of Black children and of Black community. And I made that extremely hard commitment and investment after Zimmerman got off from killing Trayvon, after Bob McCullough, who was the prosecutor in the case of Michael Brown, after he manipulated the entire grand jury process, after learning at that time about the way that the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, works with legislators in our national political system to write these laws that protect and uphold systemic white supremacy and anti-Blackness. So I made a commitment a year or two after that. We formed our chapter here in Long Beach in 2014 because that white supremacist, systemic white supremacist and institutionalized anti-Blackness we know exists deeply, locally. And so when we started to, we entered around the time that Dante Jordan was killed, and either right before or right after Tyler Woods was killed, another Black youth, right, who was shot in his back about 20 times, witnessed by a neighbor as the police shot in his back, calling him a nigger as they chased him and shot him in his back. And so in our struggle to disrupt systemic white supremacy, from the time that we began in end of 2013, our first action was in 2014 in January. We have been pressing to make sure that disruption of anti-Blackness and white supremacy is happening in all of our systems, right? Particularly around mass incarceration, around, but that's deeply connected to our political systems, and then obviously in policing. And let me tell you, I have cousins why I'm so protective over my boys and just our community. I have cousins who were imprisoned at the age of 20 and 19. I think one was maybe 17. They wanted to try him as an adult, who were just now coming. One just came home. He's in a halfway situation now. And another one who was on his way. And had to sit 20 years under these conditions of intentional harm, like committed against a whole community during a time of war on drugs, during a time of criminalizing our aunts, our uncles who were strung out on crack, right? That was dropped in our neighborhoods. We had no number 45 or number 0. I don't know, we need a new number for that dude, right? Who was saying that this is an epidemic like we are when folks are strung out on meth, right? Like there was no cry out that this was a health epidemic and we need rehabilitation at this time, right? And instead, our aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents who were becoming addicted to this were being criminalized. They're slanging VCRs or slanging their bodies or slanging their children. This is how addictive it was. The impact of that left our generation trying to survive, right? And turning to other aunts and cousins and family members and grandmothers raising children, raising us in the streets, right? And you have youth turning to each other for family, right? And kids are like, I just want to hang out with my friends, and what do I need to throw up? Like, what signal do I need to throw up to get to be in this family environment, because the state has taken our family, right? So folks were criminalized beyond these, behind this, in this era, and then and then targeted by the state as like gangsters, gang members, right? When folks are moving with family. And so I think just want to come back to the point of of our, how we're building with our youth for BLM is a part of disrupting that systemic white supremacy and how it shows up, this intentional decimation of Black families and separation of Black families. When it comes to, job training and access, when it comes to decriminalization, when it comes to education, right? When we look at the numbers, Black boys, for example, in high school meeting A through G, we all know the statistics. You all have been doing organizing work in these ways. And I just want to say a word about that. Like, I appreciate that nonprofits exist who are able to organize youth or around housing or around other issues, right? We're not a nonprofit. We're out here like, hey, stop killing us, and you need to be held accountable for these intentional harms that we've all just talked about, right? And so I think for us, it's a matter of making sure that we're centering those who are most impacted, and specifically Black youth, around how we're addressing all of these various levels of inequities and disparities and disproportionate treatment, specifically of our Black youth in every way. So it's not a monolithic approach or issue, right? It's about Black boys and Black girls in general. I'm thinking about them not meeting A through G and not graduating job ready, or at third grade level, 70% of them are not meeting these benchmarks. And now we're about to return to school when all of our children are needing some socio-emotional support, right? Who are needing this academic support, and still, Black youth are already starting out behind the mark. And so, for us, it's in every way, in every system and institution. And I think with that, given that there have been organizations right here in Long Beach, right, who have been doing youth organizing work for a long time, I think that there's a request to also nudge on our partners and friends and homies in the community, Black, brown, Asian, otherwise, to also be mindful about, in your, respected organizations, to make sure that we're also centering our Black youth as well.
Thank you so much for that, John. Like, the whole entirety of that, I appreciate you sharing it, and I commend you for sharing it, because I know how heavy that all was. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next question is, in our previous town hall, youth brought up the following recommendations and best practices. Please share your thoughts. And we will hear from Jacky and Sara, whichever one of you would like to start first.
Thank you. So yeah, I got to, read a lot of the notes from the last town hall, and there was a lot of really, really great feedback, and I think ideas that came from young folks from those. I think there was two that really stood out to me. The first one being, around defunding the police or reforming the police. I think this is one where oftentimes, folks who are within office or who work for a city will say, one, are just alarmed by that, and then two, they're like, well, what would you do if you didn't have police? And then I'm like, they feel as if community don't have answers to that. And I'm like, that's not true at all, right? Like, there's a whole list. And, the young folks, they have the answers, right? The young folks are calling for youth programs, they're calling for mental health services and supports, they're calling for more workforce development, nurses. There's a whole list of ideas that young people already have that are just waiting to, receive funding. And so, for me, I think those are the kinds of things where, when, we know where we want, where the money is, where it's tied up, and I have a whole other ideas around that. But in terms of what to spend it on, I think the answers are already there, right? The strategies are already there. We just need the funding for it, right? So I think that's one thing where I just really appreciated young folks reiterating. Again, I think it reminds a little bit of what Sara is saying, like listening, right, and then acting. The answers are there right in front of us. I think the next piece that I really took away was the question in around law enforcement in schools, and I think that the things young folks were really bringing up in the town hall are really, really, really deep. They're deep because it goes beyond just how much we spend on law enforcement to be patrolling students in schools. It goes deeper because of the fact that young people are saying they don't feel safe, they feel like they're being watched, they feel like their teachers aren't listening, they feel like they're not getting supports. And so to me, obviously, that just really tells me how adults in schools often patronize, and they, not often, but they patronize young people, and they see them as people who need to be watched, who need to be monitored, who need to be socialized, if you will, to be a certain way that is acceptable in society. And so if young people are feeling that way, we have to ask ourselves, like, what's happening at those schools? And there's obviously a history there. I mean, there's a history there of being, maybe adults at the school who may have biases against Black folks or brown folks, immigrants, queer youth who aren't fitting in a mold that they see, is what one needs. And so, I think for that, again, young people are lifting these things up. I think we have to, like Sarah's saying, listen. And again, it goes beyond just removing cops and spending on more supports. It's really also thinking about our systems and how we're engaging young people through our education system and really reforming that. And again, there are answers that young people have that we just need to listen and actually implement. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much for sharing. Sara, would you like to share?
Yeah, thanks. So as I listened to our brilliant young people, I'm going to shout them out: Amber, Marissa, Adrian, and Ammons from the last town hall. I was left with kind of this, what resonated the most was that our young people feel unsafe. They feel unsafe in their schools. They feel unsafe sometimes in their communities, often in their communities. If they are Black and brown and Indigenous youth, they feel unsafe. If they are LGBTQI youth, they feel unsafe in their communities. I heard the word safety come up a lot. I heard them talk about servicing versus policing. And I think that we need to understand that not just in terms of law enforcement, just in terms of even what's happening in schools. So as an educator, when I think about what does it mean to be safe in schools, right? What does it mean what's the best environment for a young person to learn in? It's one where they have access to those health professionals that they need. What are we looking at? If you look at statistics, I think there's something like 450 students to every one school counselor. If we look at just in terms of violence and policing that happens on campus, particularly with our Black youth, they are disproportionately affected by things like zero tolerance policies in schools. When we look at just in, as I talk to my students at UCR, they said, some of our teachers aren't even talking about what's happening outside of the classroom. How can you not? How can you not understand that this pandemic that we're experiencing, this affects our young people too? Do they have access to internet? Can they learn? If your family is worried about is housing insecure or food insecure, how are you supposed to learn? So I think when we think about, what these young people were saying, they were saying it all. And again, I'm going to go back to when are we going to listen? But it's not just about listening or comprehending. It's about really putting action to it. And I think that's where the city comes into play. I commend Long Beach for doing things like providing free, the city of Long Beach for providing free meals to everyone who needed them during the pandemic. I commend them for holding, for prioritizing youth by creating a youth strategic plan. But the real challenge is that what are we going to do with that information, right? What are we going to do? Are we going to listen? Just speaking to like what Dawn has said, Black Lives Matter has been doing this work, has been demanding these things for years. What is happening? I mean, just listening to so I think there needs to be action. When I think about education, like what leads to liberation? It's reflection plus action, right? Reflection and action. So it can't just be, we reflect, we value our youth voices. It has to be, okay, the data that we gathered from the youth strategic plan, people are out in the streets. We are going to listen. This is not a made up scenario. And I think it really stems, like, the institutional violence, discrimination that's happening with our Black community, with our Indigenous community, with our LGBTQI community. This is, you know, they're not the only ones being dehumanized. We're being dehumanized if we are letting that, if we're letting that happen. So I think it's just really important. And our young people are so brilliant. They'll tell you that. Let's listen to them, you know? And this whole NIMBYism, it's a global phenomenon now. You need to care about what's happening in your yard. You need to care about what's happening in your neighbor's yard too. If your neighbor is housing insecure or hungry and these young people are struggling, that actually is going to have an effect. There are many ways. If we want to talk about the economy, and I'm going to wrap up really quick, but if we want to talk about the economy, you know, the one way to really grow our economy is investing in youth. It's investing in young people. It's not investing in policing them. It's not investing in putting them in jail. It's investing, but also when we think about investing in schools, we need to know where that and how that money is allocated. So making them feel safe. What does it mean? I implore you all to think about, what does it mean to feel safe in your community, in your school? What do we need in order to make our young people feel safe? Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello?
You can go, James, go ahead.
Yes, again, when the youth, one thing that they said and that they made a key focal point was the lack of training for the law enforcement, the requirements. And they specifically stated that it was lawyers, doctors, and teachers have to go through more than a police officer who's held to a higher standard. And they also talked about the community-centered driven solutions. And the main thing that they also spoke of was, as well, was the infrastructural racism designed to propagate the what you just spoke of, Sara and Don, which was the prison be able to feed the prison industrial complex from the school to prison pipeline. So these are all design systems and mechanisms that are set in place to do exactly what they're doing. And as you said, Sara, and like Don and I have been out there beating these streets up and at these politicians' doors, until we actually get out there and get active and let them know that this is not going to be accepted, then it will continue. And we're all just talking.
Thank y'all for sharing those answers. Actually, they all pinpoint and segue perfectly into the next question that I'm going to pose. Before I pose the next section of our questions, I'm going to do a quick intro because I don't think a lot of y'all know who I am. But my name is Matt. Hey y'all, my pronouns are they, them. Just to give y'all a little backstory into some of the community work that I've done. I started my community work back when I was 17 and I don't remember the year, but I started with GSA Network, and then I moved on to Khmer Girls in Action with the Invest in Youth campaign, and now I'm a youth ambassador with the Invest in Youth campaign, which took a long time, but I'm pretty proud. But the next question segues perfectly into what we're talking about, actually, because it surrounds and has to do with defunding the police and what that means. So it's defunding the police while also reinvesting in the youth. So the question is, why is it important to look at police budgets as we discuss investing in youth, and what does investing in youth mean to you, and why is that important? I'm gonna pose this question to Jacky and James, and also Don, if y'all are comfortable answering.
Pass it over to James or Don if you guys want to answer that.
Okay, well, as we talk about defunding the police, we talk about the reinvestment in youth. And to me, reinvesting in youth, that's everything, not only for our community, but for the world as a whole. And then, okay, now let's go into be a little bit more detailed. We talk about in the last 5 years, the Long Beach Police Department has paid over $30 million in litigation for things such as police use of force and shootings. Now, they already get over nearly 50% of the budget itself. So when we talk about that $30 million being paid, that's coming out of the people's budget, our budget. That's not coming out of the police budget. That's general funds coming from that could be reinvested into our youth. So now we talk about there also needs to be an annual budget earmarked for the development of youth and the building of underdeveloped communities to create sustainable structural change. And why? Because it creates robust and healthy youth and communities. And also the police, their presence destabilizes and traumatizes the community. So therefore, we need to be able to create different mechanisms, as the youth spoke of in the panel at the last town hall meeting, such as creating a bigger space and more activation for social workers, behavioral health workers, community intervention workers, and substance abuse counselors, because the police officers are taking on things that they have no area of expertise in whatsoever.
Yeah, I'm happy to go next.
Yes, go ahead, Don.
Yeah, this is like, I feel like before I dive in to the divest and invest, I just want to make a mention about the reinvestment in our schools, because like a part of the divest invest in our schools, right? It's all about like our nation, most murderous of all the nations in the world, right? LA County alone had police, law enforcement have killed 610 people with immunity, no accountability, right? And you know, part of that divestment is from that. There is work that law enforcement is doing in this country that does not belong to them. This work belongs to folks who like work like them, you know, a majority of their calls are for non-emergencies, right? Things that might be related to a houseless person, or this transient doesn't belong in my neighborhood, something, or they're talking to themselves, come get them, right? Or someone might be having a mental health breakdown, or the neighbors having an argument and people feel this need out of see something, say something, I don't know, call the police for everything mentality, right? And so we have to start changing how our society thinks. I think before I dive completely into it, what I wanted to mention is, you know, in part of the investment into our schools, you know, I love that in LA and here it's a national program under the Children's Defense Fund, the Freedom Schools, because it's through Freedom Schools where our children are learning to love on themselves, they're learning their culture, they're learning how to value their Black skin in a society where society is not, right? Where there's this like harm porn, watching Black people be hung in Lancaster in the Civic Center in 2020, right? That somehow is exciting people's psyche. It's like, we need a space for our children to be centered, that is Black led, where Black teachers, where culturally competent counselors, socio-emotional and academic, are leading our children, okay? That includes in our communities. But, you know, for example, we had a conversation at the top of the year, actually, with Jill, before we knew that she was being considered as the new superintendent. We rolled out a pilot around incorporating or adopting Black Lives Matter in schools. And a part of that program, it's like, you could do this like a week long. It's very deep and rich curriculum around this, but some of the key pieces that we did for one whole week was on Monday, we talked about restorative justice, empathy, loving engagement. On Tuesday, we talked about diversity and globalism. On Wednesday, trans affirming, queer affirming, and collective value. On Thursday, intergenerational Black families and Black villages. And on Friday, conversations around Black women and being unapologetically Black in any spaces that our children are in, right? And so that is not hard to do. And if we're doing this intervention on the front end work, then we have enough counselors to be in relationship with our children, to know what's going on at home, to invest in those resources to support them that way. And therefore, we don't have to come on the back end with a punitive mindset about just disciplining children or arresting them or putting 12-year-olds in handcuffs to take them to jail, right? So I just wanted to say that around the educational piece. But, the divestment is, it's like, this is work that just doesn't belong to them. And I mentioned some of that work that they do, right? If we have our focus, I think people want to get caught up in the budget conversation because there's money there. And I get that nonprofits who have been a part of our city structure for years, 15, 20, 25 years are like, yes, finally there's some resources, right? But like it's an investment in the restoration of that intentional harm that has been like thrust upon specifically Black communities, and then by extension, right, all communities. And so the professions, we talk about creating like kind of a community health council type space that can be a combination of the health experts who should be the ones tending and responding to the calls who come up. Why do we need 911 to go to police when a majority of the calls are nonviolent? Why can't it go to fire, right? Why, the community health council space could be something made up of like the heart teams that exist under fire. We can expand those. We have health experts and professionals who are behavioral specialists, education counselors, public health professionals, community psychologists, recreational therapists. James is a behavioral specialist, school psychologists, life coaches, drug and alcohol, domestic violence, right? These are folks who can't even get jobs right now while we have police who are responding to it. And as I understand it, there are even some officers who don't feel like they want to be those first responders. But as a system, as a department, I think our police wants to keep themselves inserted in our lives in all of those ways. So when we say defund, we're not just saying defund so that folks have this extra pot of money to pull from. We're saying invest in those communities that are most marginalized to have these like preventative measures and community building measures that are culturally competent and trauma informed. And for Black community anyway, it also needs to be Black led. So when we're talking about the impacts of COVID and there are resources to tend to those needs, I'm gonna be transparent here. I've heard some conversations around things like, well, if Black people got money, then this group should get some money. And I'm kind of like, these groups have been around for a very long time in this city, 10, 15, 20 years, with lots of funding and resources that have gone to their organizational nonprofit structures. And, this cry for attention to center Black communities and our Black children that has been under-resourced or not resourced at all, or has been gatekept in some ways, right? It's a cry for finally some attention in these ways that is going to help and support everyone. So I really am hoping that some of that sentiment that I'm hearing, that folks are taking the opportunity that these type of conversations that we're having here live in this forum, that they're being held in other group spaces too, around the fact that there has been no Black organizing space. There is no Black-led youth space, right? There's no Black-led housing space, right? And so just for, folks being mindful that as we talk about divest, invest, that for Black Lives Matter globally, it's a centering of Black leadership in those spaces when it comes to Black community, and everyone benefits from that. And so someone else asked me, last piece, someone else asked me, so what percentage should we cut, right? And I'm like, all of that work, let me give you one last example. All of that work that exists, for example, the city has these quality of life programs, right? Okay, in a department that is militarized and trained to kill, quality of life, that's the work of the experts and professionals and those professions that I just mentioned a moment ago that can fall under this kind of combination health council or under the health department. So why is such a program existing under policing? If we're talking about narcotics and like drug issues in the community, we have drug and alcohol. You know, they respond to domestic violence issues. We have domestic violence professionals in the community. Why isn't that being better supported under the health department? Gang issues, right? If there are a number of officers in those gang units, there's like 13 officers in the gang unit. James, you have James right here. You have Billy, who's been doing a lot of work in the community, started out in middle schools years ago, still doing that work. You have the Hood Council, who also does this intervention work. Why are police, I mean, it's them. James has trained police. So why aren't those resources going to those who are the experts, who have the relationships, who know and understand what the issues and challenges are, and therefore are best positioned to tend to the prevention and the work of it? When the police intervene, it creates, and I think he already said this, it creates an added escalation, an added tension in our communities that have been detrimental to Black lives. So when we talk about defunding the police, we're not just saying let's create some extra dollars to go to longstanding nonprofits. We're saying defund the police and put those resources, invest them in a health environment that can then provide the actual work needed, that can keep the police out. Last example of this, Faraz Marad, brown guy, I think he's Middle Eastern maybe, right? I think some of us know this story. He was a debate student at Cal State Long Beach, brilliant debate student. His sister, I'm trying to think of her name. She's beautiful. But he hanging out with friends, smoked some weed. I think he tried some other recreational drug, had a bad trip. He threw himself out of a window. They're hanging out in an apartment, second story. He's bleeding from his shoulder, from his head. He falls out. Fire department gets there first on the scene. There were 3 firemen. They're calming him. They're de-escalating his situation. He's a little bit sporadic. They're like, hey, dude, we got you. Relax, kick back, just have a seat, sit down, lay down. In the meantime, here comes LBPD, sirens blaring. He comes out, gun pulled. The fire department had just got Faraz to lay down, to sit down, lay down. Officer Hernandez comes, rolls up, scares the crap out of Faraz. Faraz pops up in a panic. Officer Hernandez shoots him and kills him. These are not the responses that we need when a person is in crisis. Christine Gomez, just before COVID hit, 25 years old, her mother called them for help. They came and they killed her. Look it up. And then try to twist a story around it, right? The cover up begins with our mayor, with our city manager, with other departments in this city. I think I appreciate these conversations. I appreciate the centering, especially for those who have been doing organizing in a nonprofit complex in our city for a long time, to continue to center Black community, Black children, Black youth. I think I just felt that whole piece just now, so I will pull back. There you go on defund, on divest, invest.
Thank you, Don. Thank you. Everything you said was definitely understood and appreciated. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, could I add that?
Really fast, yeah, go ahead.
I want to add to what Don said, because this is something very, very key and very, very important, especially when we talk about the Black community. We cannot do business as usual. I mean, we have to be honest and transparent when we talk about these nonprofits. They have failed the Black youth and the Black community as a whole. We're talking myself and the generations up under me and the generation before me. So we're talking about 4 generations of Black men and Black people in this community who have been failed by the existing nonprofits in this community. I've been a resident here over 40-something years. So when we talk about the statistics of Blacks, we're at the bottom of every statistical category of everything good. And we're at the top of every statistical category of everything bad. So not only are the Blacks being led from, this is a deep conversation, Don, we talk about this all the time. But we cannot allow business as usual. We cannot allow the existing entities to say that they have us. They don't have us. we're telling you this now. And so when it comes to this, these processes have to be driven and led by those centered in the heart of the community, who have the credibility and the trust of the community as a whole to do the work. Thank you, Don.
Thank y'all so much for sharing. Genuinely, that means a lot, and it points to all the answers y'all shared are incredibly important. So thank you. Jacky, did you want to touch on this question before I move on to the next section of the questions? No? Okay, perfect. I'm going to go to the next section. The next section is called Structure to Sustain and Support Youth Development. The first question that I'm gonna pose this to Lian and Erick firstly. But what do y'all think is the role of the city and the community agencies to center youth development? All of y'all can answer, but at first I would like to hear from Lian and Erick.
Thank you, Mac, and thank you, Don and James, for the really rich answers that you all gave earlier. One of the things that I think is super important, particularly as we're moving forward, is really thinking about what does it mean for the community to reimagine both like public safety at the neighborhood level and also school-based safety. And I think those questions have emerged, particularly as we've at MAC and a lot of the folks in the Youth Ambassador have led the surveying process with the young people and the process with a lot of the town hall that we have done with youth. And I think it's really important to be able for both the city and community agency to create meaningful structure for real decision-making for young people. And to center youth who are the most impacted by the structural violence and institutional violence that we see in our community, and for the young people to have the voice to really shape that. And as adult allies, the other thing that's just really important is to really understand that like there is a lot of adultist structure. And so how do we meaningfully and being thoughtful about supporting and creating meaningful vehicle of decision-making and shaping of some of these programming and some of the next steps for young people. And I think it's really, for me, it has been really amazing to see youth step up and to really have them lead and co-create the process. And that's what has, for me, been really wonderful watching the Youth Ambassador really shape and co-create the process. And so, so I really want to give our young people a lot of credit for doing that. The other thing that I think is also essential as we're thinking about taking action and thinking about the how we invest in young people, in their leadership and in moving forward is some of the, and something that we would need to explore is around oversight. So oversight was looking at both like the data, the emerging data, past data, and how to make sure that the plans that we shape and create is data driven, and that the solutions that we're shaping as a community gets to the heart of some of the root causes of what have been explored in our conversation. And I think that the city could definitely play a big role in that, as well as the community agency, as well as a lot of the base building groups, the neighborhood groups, and just really thinking about making sure that we center folks who are highly impacted by the issues, and starting in the neighborhoods and in the communities that are highly impacted by a lot of the issues that the young people have raised. And then the other piece I just want to say quickly is that in terms of like for us to think about the reimagination and imagining a lot of the safety in our community, there's already been tons and tons of examples of folks who have done it really well, and of model that are very life-giving and very impressive. And so I think there's also, I would also encourage like to think about public safety, safety in our schools, to think about those conversations and those possibilities, and the role that young people could help shape in that as very exciting conversation, because I've heard some really innovative ways in which folks have been practicing that, both historically in the neighborhoods, but also how folks have been thinking about new ways of engagement. I'll pass it to Erick.
Thank you. I really like the word centering, because in my head, it makes me visualize sort of this center of gravity where youth are really there and things are drawn to that center of gravity. And I think the question, if I recall it in my head, was around what the city and community agencies can do to center youth development. And I think there's a number of really practical and even philosophical things that get to that. One is just, I think Lian spoke to this about just placing youth in a position of leadership. I'll admit, even in my organization, that's taken a lot of time, but we've now decided that a young person will be the vice chair of our youth board youth committee, which actually makes all of the decisions on federal investments of millions of dollars. So it's small things like that that really put young people in the driver's seat and really help them sort of execute a plan. They're incredibly capable. I think it's also, about this collaborative design process in all of our programs, where even if they're not sort of on a board seat, that they are actively designing sort of the programs and the environments that are there to serve them. It's certainly something that we're doing in sort of a future iteration of our youth programs and the youth center that's opening a couple months away. But I think philosophically, to be honest, all of us are leaders of our organizations or in our communities. And I think we also just have to recognize with a lot of humility that, this is not our generation. And I'm talking as somebody who's in his early 40s. I had my day and we led, a lot of change, and I was out there making a lot of noise and moving things forward for my raza and my queer people. But this is something completely different. And the young people today they're just showing up and leading. And a lot of times us as older folks, we have to step back and say, you've got to make room for folks to come through and really take that mantle. It is a different thing. And young people today are much more about intersectionality and framing their lives and their opportunities in a different way that my generation did, back in the 90s. The 90s were good though, I'll tell you. So it's a different time, and there's a different kind of wave of leadership. And we've got great organizations in the city, the UCCs and the Central CHAs and all the organizations in the Long Beach Youth Services Network. But there's space to be made and space to be had. And I think that's what it's about for me when we're talking about centering youth development.
Thank you, Erick. Hey, James, would you like to touch on this as well, to speak on Black youth in leadership positions and just that whole round?
Yes, I think we have to have a more comprehensive, realistic approach when it comes to developing Black youth and Black leadership in the positions. We have to knock down these racist institutions, policies, and practices that inhibit us from being able to learn about our culture, ourselves, the self-determination, who we are, where we come from, and the greatness. And let's be honest, we have to have an honest conversation. We have to talk about what this country is, what it was built on. Now, when we talk about that, that's going to be a little touchy for a lot of people, but it's a real life issue that we all live with every day. And we have to talk about the history that's taught in these schools. We have to talk about the savagery in which this country was built on, in which the schools are also created to train us and not inform us, of educate us about life and the different things about it. And we have to also talk about the stabilization of these children when it comes to the household. We have to address the immediate needs of them, be able to relieve the stressors such as mental health issues and stabilize their circle of life and the different things around the children. So we have to go real deep. And as we talk about the extended family, the community, the mental, the physical, the spiritual aspects surrounding a child that creates stability. And if any of these mechanisms are off, there's going to automatically create a dysfunction for that child. And from there, the child is already starting off on an unleveled playing field. So we have to start from the root, which is the household and the child, and everything centering around that child. We have to build all of those up.
I completely agree. Thank you for pinpointing that. Actually, that's a very important point. And segueing from that to our next question, and since we only have about 13 or so more minutes left, just to let you know our time check, we only have about 2 more questions left. The next question is as stated: how do you imagine city-school partnerships to support youth development, i.e. coordination, mentorship, mental health, family resources centers, and shared space use? I would like to actually point this question towards either Sara or Jacky, if y'all have anything to say towards that.
Yes, I have a lot to say about it, but I'm going to keep it brief. So I think the city can do a number of things because schools are microcosms or small kinds of communities and cities themselves. I think that the city can do a lot to pick up the slack of what's not happening in schools. So as I mentioned before, we have a real dearth of mental health professionals that are available to our young people. I think the city can provide those health resources and make them more available for young people. When I listened to the last town hall, when I was there for the Youth Strategic Plan forums, there was just, a constant reminder of like the need for mental health resources in terms of our young people. And they're really desiring that, they're needing that. It's not just a want, it is a need. And I think when we think about what's happening currently, now more than ever do our young people need access to good healthcare. And I say good healthcare because not all healthcare is good healthcare. We can see examples of how young people and their families are not being served, even when it comes to their health needs, when we look at the discrepancies in terms of the pandemic and how communities are being affected. So that is indicative that communities are not receiving the healthcare benefits and resources that they need. So I think when it comes to schools and city partnerships, I think there are a couple of things that are really central and key. Number one, transparency. I think young people need to understand how institutions function, and our institutions need to be transparent in terms of how they are allocating monies, what they're prioritizing. When I listened to the young folks on the panel, they talked about divestment and defunding of the police, but they also talked about reinvesting it in the parks department. They talked about reinvesting it in workforce development. We need our young people to be able to have access to the resources that they need in order to be good students, in order to academically achieve. Their healthcare needs have to be taken care of. You need proper, you need access to good, healthy food. You need fair and affordable housing. How do you learn? I want you all to think, like, how do you learn with a simple toothache? We give this example all the time as teachers. Like, if a student of yours has a toothache, how is it possible for them to learn? It's not, right? Have you had a toothache and it's so imagine then if your parents don't know where you'll be living, or you're homeless and you're living in your car. Imagine then if your parents don't have jobs, or your caretakers don't have jobs. Imagine if you don't have access to food, or you're feeling food insecure. All of those things need to come together if we really value our youth. And I know, I've heard every single city leader representative say that they value youth. Okay, so if we value our youth, let's make housing affordable. If we value our youth, let's make access to healthcare affordable. If we value our youth, let's make them feel safe. So I think it's really about having, what one is lacking, because I know that the city doesn't have a lot of jurisdiction or say in what happens in LBOC. But I think that young people will let us know what they need, and have let us know what they need, so we can invest in those things as a city.
Perfect. Thank you, Sara. Jacky, you can go ahead and answer the question.
Actually, I'll defer. I think we can go to the next one. I think.
Okay, bet. Unless anyone else wants to answer the question or has any answers for the question, if they'd like. Okay.
If I may add.
No, yeah, go ahead, James.
I agree with Sara. I think that there needs to be a more comprehensive approach to the school and the city relationship, because the schools can identify those students who are at risk and those who are high achievers, and the city, and from there needs to be referrals to some type, to rather it's intervention work, apprenticeship, internship work, and those funds should be earmarked from the city to make the investment into our youth, especially when we're talking about inner city youth. Those relationships need to be strengthened and more trusted amongst each other, and with those in the community being involved in that process.
Perfect. That was actually our last question of the day. So I'm going to open us up to our closing. First, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you, Erick. Thank you, Jacky. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Mina, for helping me co-moderate. Thank you, Lian. Thank you, James. Thank you, Sara. And thank you, everyone watching as well. To help close, I would very much like to just share a quick poem that I wrote, just to reiterate the fact. I'm Black before I'm anything. Black before I'm Black before I'm gay. I'm Black before I'm non-binary. I'm Black before anything. If someone looks at me, they see Blackness. So this poem that I wrote is called Hashtag, and it pinpoints to the fact that a lot of my Black brothers and sisters' names have been reduced to just hashtag. So it goes like this. Stop. Put your hands up and get on your knees. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say or do can be used against you in the court of law. All of these things are what we're told happen during an arrest. Let me ask you a question, though. What happens when the arrest is never made? Sean Bell, Queens, New York, November 25th, 2006, celebrating his bachelor's party. The sound of wedding bells stripped away from him as a team of plainly dressed officers loosely sprayed 50 shots of copper teardrops, breaking his skin and stopping his heart, while in turn breaking another. This is for Pulcher Bell. He shot me. You shot me, bro. I got a daughter. The subway station erupts in frantic yells, videos being made and posted within seconds. Oscar Grant III on New Year's Eve 2008. After being attacked on the train, Grant and his friends were pulled off at Frufo station and detained. A black face on the cold subway tile, a pale knee pressed against his cheek. 5 seconds later, the echo of a gunshot rang throughout the tunnel, shaking the walls and hearts of many. This is for Tatiana and Sophia. As we all know, the hoodie is used for warmth. Candy is usually bought to be eaten, and tea is usually for drinking. Yet when you're a Black boy in a neighborhood that doesn't know your skin is just skin and not a threat, that the Skittles are just Skittles and it's not a gun, that it's laid outside and you just want to get home, the story goes a bit differently. Trayvon Martin, on February 26, 2012, was unlawfully shot in the chest by George Zimmerman, all because he wanted his ears to be warm. He wanted a bag of candy and a drink. This is for Tracy Martin and Sabrina Fulton. There are so many names I can add to this poem. Lionel Gibson, Tony McDade, Breonna Taylor, Tyler Gibson, Sandra Bland, Eric Gardner, George Floyd. So many lives taken, families torn apart by a split-second decision in which hate overrides human decency, overrides human life. Tell me, when will our gunpowder skin stop being the cause of innocent deaths? My brother was 9 when I first wrote this poem. He is now 13. And my fear of his name one day being a part of the many hashtags we must mourn is lung stopping. This is for all the mothers and fathers laying awake at night knowing it's a possibility their kin may feel the pain of a bullet rather than the warmth of their bed. This is for my uncles. I'm sorry your fear of late night walks overrides your need for food. Tell me, do you think they can hear us? Are they even listening? Are all the mistaken gunshots deafened them? Thank you. That's all. But again, I appreciate all of you guys for sharing space with us today and joining this town hall meeting. It's definitely appreciated. And thank you for all your answers and all your stories and all the information. Yeah, thank y'all so much.